Well, welcome everybody to the July 2017 Project of the Month. As you've already looked at the project, you know that the focus of this month's project was around the 4th of July. And I realize that the 4th of July has already passed, but I want you to, as you look at this project, think about applications to other holidays and other events that may be coming up. And I really enjoyed this. This is a project, I didn't invent the project, I was actually watching a show, a sewing show, and this was a project that they did on the sewing show. And if you've ever had an outdoor barbecue and used a tablecloth, which I think most of us have, and how do you hold the tablecloth in place? A breeze comes along and whoosh, there goes your tablecloth. So when this project, I saw it, I was like, okay, I've got to do it. And I think the Americana Applique design collection is perfect for this. So to get started with the project, I just want to remind everyone that where you find the materials is when you open up your software. Then it's going to, if you're connected to the internet, you have your page there that takes you to the myfloriani.club. You're going to go to the club and log in. When you log in, you're going to click on the tab that says Monthly Designs and Project. When you select that, it's going to take you to the page. So you see here, this is the page for July. And these are your 5 free designs for July, and there's the project files. So a little bit later in the lesson, I will review where you find that. The free design that you get this month comes from the Americana Applique collection. This is a very unique collection of applique in that it utilizes raw edge techniques. So we'll look a little bit more at that. And for those of you that are fairly new to maybe embroidery or applique in the hoop or something, this might be something new to you. And so we'll look at that, but this is a very fun technique. And I think it's not as formal as an applique design. You want to make sure that you print the handouts with the directions and the materials, and then you're going to print them off. And when you do that, you're going to have a really nice document that you can either keep and refer back to, but it will walk you through what I did in the software to create the project, and also it will walk you through how to put the project together. The objectives, we're going to work with grid settings. I have done this before in previous lessons, but I'm going to go back and review it. We're going to work with motif stitches, and I've done this before in a lesson. As a matter of fact, if you want to learn how to create your own motif stitch, you can refer back to the December of 2016 project. It was doing a scarf, and we created a motif stitch in there. But we're going to look at motif stitches. They're very unique. We're going to work with sizing them and adjusting the start and stop of that motif stitch. We're going to create applique from the artwork library from a shape, and then we will modify applique properties in there. So not really a complicated lesson. As far as your materials, you want to make sure that you have your FTCU software with and you've downloaded the free design, and the project comes with a free design. You want to make sure that you print the handout, and the handout, I try to include a very detailed list in there, and I try to think about everything you would possibly need. So we're going to use a special thread this month, and the thread is from the Creative Thread collection, and it's a variegated, and it's color number 30. The color is red, white, and blue, and it is perfect for this project. You want to use Floriani Perfect Stick Tearaway Stabilizer, and there's other options, but this is my preferred stabilizer. Excuse me. Red, white, and blue threads to match the fabric. So you need a couple of different materials. If you look down here on the bottom, you're going to need a tablecloth, and I put down white, but you want to get a solid color one. Excuse me. Once you have your tablecloth, which is your base, we're going to need some fabric for the designs. And of course, these are patriotic designs, so the fabric is red, white, and blue. So once you have your fabric, and you don't need a lot of fabric for this project, so this is kind of what we call in the quilters world a stash buster project, but you need a fat quarter of red and blue. And then I would suggest 1/2 yard of white fabric. And the white fabric is utilized in the applique, and I used it to line the pockets. So we're going to create pockets. You'll need some trim, and that's just as desired. But to create the pockets, I recommend a heavy material. And what I used was white denim. The whole purpose of creating these pockets and sewing them onto the tablecloth is you leave an opening in the top of the pocket, and then you drop, if you don't have a weight, you drop a rock in there. You find a fairly large rock and you drop it into each of the corners, and then that weight holds the tablecloth in place. If you're a scuba diver like I am, you can use scuba weights to go in there, and they're not going to be as messy and they're more streamlined. Or you could use drapery weights. So any kind of a weight is going to go into the corner of that, and then it will hold the tablecloth on the table for breezes, not wind. Wind will still take this off the table unless you glue it down. So, but it will hold it in place. And so make sure you get your fabric. Once you've selected your fabric, use your Floriani thread chart to find the appropriate colors. And I recommend that you match the thread color to the fabric. And that's because of the technique that this applique uses. You'll need your embroidery needle. You need embroidery perfection tape. I recommend the Floriani Educator Favorite Tool Collection. This is brand new. The reason why I like it is it has the scissors that you need, and it also has a stiletto in there. And the stiletto you can use for scoring and holding things in place. I used a Quilter Select 5-inch ruler, and we're going to use that not for the cutting of the fabric, but for actually marking the corners of the tablecloth. Your Quilter Select rotary cutter, I put this down. If you have not gotten one of these yet, I really recommend it. These rotary cutters are fantastic. They have a really nice heft to them, and they just work beautifully. I already mentioned that you need your tablecloth. You also need some kind of a marking pen. I use friction pens. I've been using them for many years without any results that I've been unhappy with. If you want to use a blue wash away pen or something like that, you could use that also. You will need a sewing machine because in this project we're going to create the pockets, and then we're going to stitch the pockets onto the tablecloth. And I wouldn't hand stitch them because you need a good sturdy stitch, because once you put those weights in the pocket or the rock in the pocket, you need a good heavy seam to hold that pocket in place. Press your tablecloth and fold it into quarters and then set it aside. And then cut your denim fabric. Now, I like this technique. I cut my fabric ahead of time. So if my pockets were going to finish, they finished at about 5.5 inches. So I took my denim fabric and I cut 7-inch squares so that I'm not hooping the whole piece of fabric. I don't like to hoop the whole fabric, and that's just my preference because I feel like when I get done, I have to cut the excess fabric away, and I don't like to save little scraps of fabric. All right, let's go ahead and go over to our software lesson. So I already have my FTCU software open, so I'm toggling over to it. And I'm going to start off, of course, with a blank document. Now, my grid is already showing. I'm going to go ahead and toggle that off. And so if you notice, I've got my cursor on the ruler. There's a ruler that goes across the top of the page. There's a ruler that goes along the side of the page. And if you place your cursor directly on the ruler and right-click, it will bring up this menu. And these are tools for working with the ruler. For instance, you can toggle back and forth real quickly between metric and inches. So for instance, if I change the metric, my top ruler guide up here says mm, and I'm going to go over, and this impacts all of the tools that you use. So I'm going to show you an example. I'm clicking on my ruler tool here. I'm going to left click. I'm going to drag over. And if you look at the tool tip that pops up behind it, it gives me the distance in millimeters, and it tells me the type of stitch that I would use if I was working with a shape that is that wide. Now, I'm going to right-click. I'm going to toggle back over to inches. I've still got my ruler activated. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click and drag over, and what you'll see is that now I've got the distance on the back of that in inches. So when you set inches and millimeters up here, then what you're going to find is it affects all of your tools. It affects your properties tool and everything. So that's why we have it up there, so you can real quickly access that and toggle back and forth. Also, you've got your grid tools here. So here's our show grid, and I'm going to go in here to grid settings. Now, this is not the only way to access your grid settings. Let me cancel out of that. I'm going to go up under tools, and I'm going to come down to preferences. When you update your software, all of your tools and your preferences will default. They will go back to the factory setting in there. So the first time you opened up your software, that's what you're going to have. On this preferences tool, if you've done a recent update, then you would want to go back in and change the settings for your preferences. But I was going to show you this. Under the preferences, there is this option right here, and it is exactly identical to the option that you have when you right-click. But these are your grid settings. So with that in mind, when we go into the grid settings, when you default open it up, the grid is about set at 0.33 inches because it's set in millimeters. It's set for, I believe it's 1 millimeter and 10 millimeters. Don't quote me on that. I like to work in my software, and when I'm working on a project and designing a shape, and this month we're doing a pocket shape, I like to set my grid this way. Horizontal and vertical spacing is set at 0.25. Now notice I'm in inches. If you bring up your options dialog and it says mm back here, you'll probably see over here on the ruler it's going to say mm. So that's where you would right click on that and toggle it over into inches. All right, we're going to set the horizontal and vertical spacing at 0.25. And as I go into my screen, I've got the grid displayed here. And what this does for you is that every one of these little dashed lines is 1/4 of an inch. And this makes a real nice backdrop when you're in the designing process, because it allows you to see if I were doing a 1/4 inch seam or a 1/2 inch seam. The other thing that I like to do is on my grid major right here, I like to put my horizontal lines at 4 and 4. When you do that, I now have a horizontal line, and if you look across the top here at inches, I have a horizontal line at 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch. So it gives you a real nice visual backdrop for working on different kind of projects. Now, if I were digitizing an embroidery design, I would definitely set my grid differently. I would set it in millimeters, and I would be working in millimeters, because when you're working with stitches, which an embroidery design is a stitch, we work in millimeters. 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter stitch width. So that's how I like to do it. I've also found here under style, there's several options here. For instance, you can show your grid as solid lines, as dashed lines, and as dots. I would encourage you to try each one of those options. I prefer the dashed lines. What I found is that when I put my grid as solid lines, it's too busy in the background. It's just full of lines. And if I show my grid as dots, I can't see those 1/4 inch markings. So I found that grid as dashed lines is really a nice sweet spot. Some other options here is snapping to the grid and the guidelines and the anchors. We're not going to work too much with that in this particular month, but we've worked with that in the past where we snap the grid to the guidelines, and hopefully we'll work with that in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK in there, and I'm going to go and I'm going to click on my tool right here to select to get rid of my ruler tool. That tool, when you select it, will stay stuck to your cursor until you click on something else. Now, I have downloaded my free lessons, and I'm going to, let me just make my screen a little bit smaller here. And we're going to go into our library panel. And once you have downloaded your free designs and your free projects, on your library panel right here, this is where you're going to access those free designs. So here's all of my free designs. And right here, free monthly designs, and right here is my free FTCU project. So I'm going to expand that, and they're organized by month. And when you click on the plus sign next to July, this is July's project. This was July of 2016, and we're going to select and highlight that folder for July of 2017. Once I have that selected, I come over to my Designs tab. What you have on this tab, this is our free design from this month. So I want you to left click on that. I want you to drag it into your page. The other thing that you'll find that you were given is these are just the project. These are this is the pocket that I created and stitched out. So if you had a question about something that I had done, you could go ahead and you could open that up and you could kind of break it down and examine it. So we've got this embroidery design, and one of the benefits of having your software, I'm going to come over here and click on 3D. When you look at this, I think when I first got these designs, I wasn't exactly sure what I was supposed to do with them, because as I looked at the picture on the cover, it's like, oh, it's applique. But when I brought the design in the software, and I encourage you, every time you have a new design, bring it into your software, and you're going to utilize your slow redraw, or you're going to use your simulate sewing right over here. And I observed how this design was going to stitch out, and I kind of, this was a good clue. I thought, okay, this is a different kind of applique. When I look at my sequence view window over here, the first item right here, when I look at that, it's a run stitch. And when I look at the second item right here, it's a bean stitch. So I used my software to help me analyze what type of a design this was, so that before I move the design to my machine, and I'm surprised when I get to my machine and I don't know what to do, then I could kind of look at what's going on over here. Now, before I started the webinar today, I set up a document, and I'm going to go ahead and just toggle over to this document, because what I've done in this document, I'm going to zoom to fit right here, and this is the embroidery design that you were given in 3D. But I went ahead and I brought in as a backdrop the picture of the finished design, because I want to explain to you, if you're new to applique, or maybe you've been working on machine applique, these designs are raw edge applique, which is a totally different kind of technique, and it gives you a totally different look. Traditionally, when we do applique in the hoop of our machine, we, as a last part of the applique process, we would go back and we would cover the edge of the fabric right here with a decorative stitch, and it would be a satin stitch, or it might be some kind of a motif stitch. With raw edge applique, we're going to utilize a running stitch right here, and the whole objective, and let me just zoom in because you can see it real nicely here, is that we want to leave an edge, because we want that edge to fray. That gives it a very, I think when you think about Americana, I think it gives you a much more informal look, and this is intentional. So this is a different kind of applique technique that you may want to utilize. I'm going to show you, we're going to walk through the process of what we're going to do at the embroidery machine, because it is a little bit different. The first thing I'm going to do is, in my sequence view window, I'm going to click on this eye that's next to each object. And what you'll see is that as I select that, it hides the stitches. And this is actually called hiding the stitches. So I'm going to go back, and the stitches are still there, but can I select them? No. I've just hidden them. So now I can see, I can isolate the first part of this design. So that's what those little eyes are for. When you're working in this view, when you hide your stitches, you also have a tool over here, and it's this little ghost, and that will bring in those hidden stitches. But can you select them? If you see that, no. But I can still select the stitches here that aren't hidden. And this is just another tool when you're working with an existing embroidery design and you have a specific area that you want to work on, utilize this hide stitches tool. Let me go ahead and turn the ghost back on. So this is the first part of the design. And when it stitches out, it's got two running stitches. And this is a fabric placement stitch. So after those stitch out, I'm going to lay down my white fabric. I'm then going to stitch the second color. And the second color, I've got it highlighted here, and you'll see the type of stitch that it is a bean stitch. And what a bean stitch does is it repeats over the top. So as it stitches, for every stitch in here, it's going to go back and forth 5 times. And what this gives you, it gives you a real heavy thread effect. It's actually quite nice. So I'm going to do the fabric tap down. I'm going to stitch the second part of that, which is the bean stitch. I'm going to stop the machine, and I'm going to change my thread color right here, and I'm going to change it to red. I'm going to remove my hoop from the machine. I'm not going to unhoop my fabric, but I'm going to use my scissors, and I'm going to trim along the edge of the fabric right here. Whoops, we're going to do the white first. So I'm going to trim close, but not too close. I want to leave a little edge on there. The edge is intentional. Then we're going to go ahead. We're going to move to the red. we're going to stitch the first part of the red design, which is for fabric placement. That stitches down. I lay a piece of red fabric over the top of the hoop. I come back and I stitch the second. So we've got, if we're looking at color changes, this is color 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is our fourth color stop. That color stop is once again with the red thread. Notice that it is a beam stitch, and so that's going to come down. It's going to lay heavily that red thread on top of the design right here. And then I'm going to once again change to my blue thread, which is the fifth color. I change to my blue thread, but before I stitch out that fabric, I'm going to remove my hoop and I'm going to very carefully trim away the red fabric, leaving that raw edge. Then I'm going to stitch out the blue design. I'm going to go ahead right here. Let's activate that. That is the blue run beam stitch. It's going over the top there. And then the last thing is I'm going to change to a gold thread, and it's up to you what kind you want. You could even use your gold metallic thread. And it's going to stitch this design on top. So I wanted to break down this reverse applique so that you would understand that. Now, all of the designs in the Americana Applique collection utilize this particular technique, this raw edge applique. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're ready to work on our pocket. So we've got our design, we're going to bring it in. We're not going to do really anything with this design. I like the design the way that it is. Now I know sometimes we go ahead and we break apart the design and manipulate different things, but in this month's project, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in an artwork square. So I'm going to left click on my tool. I'm going to select rectangle. As soon as you select that, when you move your tool down into the software, you'll see that my cursor's changed and I have a little box on the back side of it. I'm going to left click and drag, and I'm going to put a box in there. I'm not going to worry about trying to get the box exactly straight, although I've got my grid in the backdrop and I could do that. But I found it to be faster. Now this is artwork. If you go to your sequence view window, running stitch, it tells me right there that it's artwork. When you add artwork in there, whenever you add anything and you create it, by default, it will bring in the last color that you're working with. So you'll see that I've got yellow there, and I'm just going to real quickly click on a color chip. Doesn't make any difference what color, but I'm going to change the color of that artwork so that it's just a little bit darker and I can see it better. Okay, so I've got my artwork. Now I want to resize it. I'm going to transform it. Now, as you work on your project, and when we go to the last part of the webinar today and we talk about constructing the project, I used the store-bought tablecloth, and I put the tablecloth on the table, and there's something called a drop, and that's the part of the tablecloth that hangs over the edge of the table, and that's intentional. You want that, and that's where you're going to add the pocket. You need to have that drop off the side of the table. So put your tablecloth on the table and measure the drop. That's going to determine the size of the pocket. If you make the pocket too big, it's not going to work properly for putting the weight in there and hanging the tablecloth so that it looks good. So measure that, and what I decided, or after I put my tablecloth on, is I had a nice big edge there, but I decided to put in a 5.5, 6-inch square, so right in that area. So we're going to change the size of the artwork square, and right now I'm just referring to the handout that goes along with the lesson, and I'm on step 3, which is page 4 with the artwork, and I'm going to resize this square to be 5.5 inches. So on my transform tab, if you notice, this is not a square right now, it's a rectangle. So I'm going to deselect this box. I'm going to uncheck that maintain aspect ratio. When I do that, that allows me to put in my height, 5.5, and my width, 5.5 here. Now, once I've got those numbers entered in there, I'm going to click on apply, and that resizes the square. Don't worry. Notice that the design is too large to fit in the square as it exists right now. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to resize that embroidery design. We're going to select it. I just go ahead and click on it. And if you've been watching these webinars for a while, if you've been doing the projects, you'll find that 9 times out of 10, when I resize a design, I have an exact size that I want the design to be. And so I'll select it, I'll come up under my Transform tab, and I'll go, okay, I want the design to be 6 inches wide, or 5 inches wide, or 4 inches wide. This time, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to eyeball the size of the design. And I'm also going to use my grid in the background to help me with that. Now remember, this is 1/4 of an inch and an inch. So with that design selected, I'm going to come up and always resize from the corner. I'm going to drag in a little bit. I'm going to move that. I'm going to see how that fits into the grid. It's still a little bit large. I'm going to bring that one in. So all I'm doing right now is I'm just really eyeballing that. I'm going to deselect it, and I've got about 1/4 of an inch here and 1/4 of an inch here. So that looks pretty good. With this design resizes really nice and cleanly, and it has to do with the fact that it's primarily running stitches in here. These are the only fill stitches. So this is going to resize really, really nice and cleanly. And once I've got that resized, I'm going to center these items. So I'm going to select this box, and I'm going to come up and click on Align to the center of the page. There's 0 and 0. And I'm also going to select my design, and I'm going to align that to the center of the page. Okay, that's looking pretty good. What are we going to do now? Well, this box is going to be turned into, and I'm just going to go back over to my pocket so that you can see. What we've got here is that we're going to use a running stitch to, number 1, hold the fabric down. And number 2, that's going to be our cutting guide when we get done with the project. After we stitch this out, we're going to use a straight edge ruler and a rotary cutter, and we're just going to lay the straight edge right there on the box and then move it over. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me go back over to my pocket design right here, and that is 5 1/2. So I'm going to take that, and we're going to go ahead and copy it. We have to copy this. And what we're going to use to copy it is, this is something in the most recent update, and I love this feature. These are called selection tools. If you have the latest update of the software, and it should be version 3230, and if you don't know what version of the software you're in, click on the Help menu, come into About. And when you come into that, on the very top line up here, it tells you the build. So you should be in 3230. That's the version that's released to the public. If you have that version and you don't see these tools, you have to activate them. So you will come back up to that Tools menu. We were here earlier, and you're going to come down to Preferences. This should look familiar. When you come back into the Preferences tool right here, click on the View menu. And in the View menu, there is a box right here called Show Selection Control. That's probably deselected if you can't see those. So check that box, say OK, and now you'll see those tools. So these tools just streamline the workflow process for you. And one of the tools in the software in the lower left-hand corner is the Duplicate tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And what it does is it real quickly duplicates whatever I have selected. And this is what I love about it. It moves it. So now that I actually see that I've got 2 artwork boxes there. Now, by contrast, there's more than one way to duplicate. And we've done this before we had the duplicate tools. I've done this. I select the object. I come up. I use Copy, and I use Paste, which I'm doing right now. So over in my Sequence View window, you can see I've got 3 artwork objects. When I look in my page, I don't see 3 blocks. And when you do a copy and paste, let me just select that one and move it over. When you do a copy and paste, it pastes it directly on top of the item that you copied. So if I had a design selected in the software and I by accident copied and pasted it, that design would stitch out 2 times. And I've done that before where I copied and pasted and you're stitching out the design and all of a sudden it starts with stitching again. You're thinking, what the heck is going on? And I went back in and I had copied and pasted the design so that I had a design sitting directly on top of the previous one. So get in the habit of using that duplicate tool. It's a really nice feature. Let me go ahead and undo to get rid of that box. I'm going to go back over here and just make sure that I only have 2 artwork boxes. Let me select the first one, and they're both the same color. I want to separate these out. I want to make them a different color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just come down and click on a different color chip, and it doesn't make any difference, but I like contrast, so I'm going to put pink in there. All right, so they're 2 different colors, and we're going to take the pink one, and we're going to move it to the top of the design. So I right-click, I move first. Now it's right up here, and it's going to be, I'm going to convert it to stitches, and it will be the first item to stitch out. And if you remember, when I go back into my project, that right here, this will stitch out first, and it's almost like a basting stitch. It's going to give me a cut line, but it's also going to hold the fabric down for me. So it's a double featured item. How do we convert it to stitches? It's artwork. We're going to come down onto our Stitch Effects toolbar, which is down here on the bottom of the page, and we click on Run. And that's now a running stitch. By default, that running stitch comes in at 2.5 inches. That's fine. You can leave it at 2.5 inches. That stitch is actually going to be embedded into the seam of the pocket, so you don't need to worry about it. So we're going to leave that the way it is. I'm going to even leave it the color that it is. And then we're going to come down, and we've got this artwork, okay? Let me go ahead and center that up because when I changed the color, it moved it. So let's center that. And it is a little too big for my pocket. And if you come back over in here, this is the outside stitch, and this is going to be the motif stitch that we're going to put in there. So let's go back to the pocket, and what we're going to do is we're going to take that and we're going to convert it to a motif stitch. So we're going to come down to the Stitch Effects toolbar again and click on that Run Motif. And by default, it comes in with this motif stitch. It always chooses 201. It's not the prettiest stitch. You're probably looking at that thinking, oh, I don't like that at all. All we need to do, let's do something else here. Let's take that first box right here and let's resize it. And I'm going to transform it, and I'm going to use my Maintain Aspect Ratio, and I'm going to make that 6 inches. Okay. And I'm going to click on Apply. Okay, so it's a little bit bigger. And now, as I work with my motif stitch here, I know that I've got that other stitch in the backdrop. We're going to change the motif stitch type, and you have a lot of different motif stitches in here. And the one that we're going to utilize today is, and I wrote the number down. Let me go back in and find it. It is 223, I believe. 223. Let's just see if I remember that correctly. Yes, I do. 223, right there. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to click on Apply. I'm going to deselect it. Okay. Now, as I observe this, I see a couple of things that I don't like. Number one, I don't like the spacing of this motif around the outside. And number two, I see a big problem right here. And if I were to take this design to my machine and stitch it out, I would have a gap right there. We're going to fix the gap, and we're going to make these star shapes stand out. So let's go back and select it again. And this becomes a process of what I consider trial and error. So I might change my pattern size. And you know why I change things? Because I can. And we're going to change the run spacing. And the run spacing is the distance between each of these little motif designs. So let's change that to 1 and see what happens. Okay, so I've got a little more gap in there, but I want even more. So I might make it 1.5 and see how that looks. That looks even better. And I might even try to bump it up to 2 and see what I get. And the other thing that I'm looking at also is that I found a lot of times with the motif stitches, As you manipulate the pattern size and the run spacing in there, if you have something like this gap right here, you can eliminate that just through the process of changing the pattern size. Notice that that's not what's going on with this design, so we're going to have to go to the next step. I don't usually change the stitch length in there, especially with this particular design. If I were to adjust the stitch length, one of the things that would happen is that it's the little stitches that make up this star design. So if I were to change the stitch length, I would probably impact the way that that design stitches out, and I might impact my nice clean corners in the shape on there. So I'm going to leave that the way it is. How are we going to get rid of this little spacing in here, though? Very, very easy. We're going to change the start and stop point. To do that, make sure that you have just the motif stitch selected. So I can either use my sequence view window, and that's probably the best way to do it, or I can just come in and select it. Once we have that motif stitch selected, we're going to come up and we're going to use our shape tool right here. We're going to activate the shape tool. When we do that, it will show us the nodes that create the shape, which we can move. But right here at the very upper corner is the start and stop. And so I'm going to left click directly on that and drag it down a little bit. The start point comes with it. Now I'm going to click on apply. Look right there. Let me zoom out just a little bit, because I want to see sometimes when I change the start and stop point, it will impact the other stars, but that looks good. So I recommend that when you do this, always zoom out to see the effect that you get. So once I have that pattern filled in the way that I like it, the last step is, and this is something new to the software also, we're going to preview how this looks with the variegated thread. Whoa, maybe you haven't done this before. Before we could do this, make sure, click on select thread and make sure you're working in your Floriani poly thread chart, okay? Because if you're in a different thread chart like Isocord, or if you're working in Quilter Select, we have Quilter Select thread charts now. If you have one of those selected, you won't be able to do this. I've got my Floriani poly thread chart activated, and then I'm going to use the color find tool right here, and I'm going to search that. And what we're going to do is we're going to search by the number, and the color of the thread that we're looking for is number 30. This is the variegated thread, and we're going to click on find. All right, so do you see right here at the bottom, I now have all of our different variegated threads, and I love this feature. Here's that V30 right there. Select it. Voila! Now I can preview what this design is going to look like with that variegated thread in there. So I love the ability to be able to apply variegated threads in to a design and preview it. Now, granted, it will look a little bit different, but this thread has a 1-inch color change, and so at this size, this is pretty close to what it is going to look like. This is looking good. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save my design for stitching out. So I come in, I'm going to use save, and we also now, in the most recent update, under our tools menu, on this first screen right here under preferences, you select your default save format right here. So if I select a machine format, for instance, Brother, right here, when I select that, it says you want to auto save. When I use that, when I set this up, when I come up and click on save, it automatically saves this design in my machine format, so I'm ready to take it to my machine. But it saves a copy of it in a WAF format. And you always want to save your designs in a WAF format, because that is what you're going to open and make changes to. Okay, that's good. We have one other part of the project that we're going to do. So we're going to open up a new document. We're going to come into our custom shapes library. I'm going to click on that. Make sure you've got two libraries right here. You have Easy Art and Custom Shapes. Make sure that you're in the Custom Shapes library. We're going to scroll down, and I want, you know, if I were trying to explain the difference between the custom shapes library, you'll see that they're more outline based. They're all outlined. If you come into your Easy Art library, although they're outline based, they're more complex outlines. So you'll see, for instance, even though these are outlines, they've got multiple colors and components in there. So all we're looking for, and these work better with applique, is we're going to look for an artwork shape down here in the shape of a star. So they're alphabetized. I'm scrolling down to the S categories. And when it comes into stars, I have 5 different stars to choose from. And this is entirely up to you. Choose the star that you like the best for this project. So here is star 3. It's too round for my taste. Star 4, still a little too round. Star 5 is a little skewed, which is great, except that the applique design is skewed. So I don't want a skewed star around the outside. So I'm going to go with the plain star right here. It has the most traditional shape. When you bring it in, it comes in as artwork right there. Okay. To convert this to applique, and we're going to convert it to an applique stitch, and I'm going to show you in a minute why I chose applique instead of just turning this into a satin stitch. We're going to come down, we're going to click on applique. One click right there. Now, I can save this design as applique, and when we create applique from artwork, I love the feature that over here under the properties box, it automatically does the placement line, and let me expand this, placement line, tack down stitch, and cover stitch right there. If I don't want to sew the placement line, all I need to do is click on that. And when I save it, the placement line doesn't come with the design. And if you've done applique in the hoop before, I've done this where the color will come up and I just skip over a color because I don't want to do a placement line. In Floriani software, you don't have to do that. You can bring your applique design in and you can deselect that. So here's my tack down stitch. I don't need a tack down stitch either, because as I stitch this out, what I'm going to do is I stitched it with my red, white, and blue thread around the outside, and I just left it white on the inside. So I'll go ahead and apply that. So when I save that, the only thing that exports with that is just the satin stitch. Now, why did I not bring in the artwork and just convert it to a still stitch, which is a satin stitch? I'm going to do a comparison here. Let me go back and find my comparison, app comparison. Here's 2 hearts. The first heart that I have, I converted it using a run motif stitch. Excuse me, not a run motif. I converted it into a steel stitch. I apologize for that. When I do that, the default settings for a steel stitch is 2.5 millimeters wide and a density of 5, which is great, but I don't, I might want to change the density, and I definitely want to have a heavier stitch in there. By contrast, here's the applique stitch that I created. When you bring in an applique stitch, you'll see that the width of it is 3 millimeters and the density is 0.4, which is actually denser. The smaller the number, the denser the design. So that's why I chose to do this as an applique instead of a steel stitch. But it's up to you. We want this to be open. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to save that. All right, so that's what we're doing in the software. Let's go back over and finish out the project and how we're going to put this together. So this is a new product. We've got a few products that I'm very excited about, and then of course tips and tricks for the construction. First of all, make sure that you print your handout. And as a review, you're going to use Windows Explorer. You're going to navigate into your C drive, Floriani Designs, Pre-FTCU Projects, July and July of 2017. When you do that, you're going to see these files in here. The file that you're going to print is right here. It's this PDF file, the Americana Applique. So you're going to double click, you're going to open it up. It opens it in Adobe Acrobat Reader, which is a free program, and then print that. Okay, as far as the construction of the project, start with a tablecloth that you purchased. I'm all about streamlining the project. I found this tablecloth in the markdown bin, and frequently you can find these in the markdown bin. And not only did I find this in the markdown bin and it was 50% discounted, but I also had a coupon for an additional 20% off. So this tablecloth, which measures 52 inches by 70 inches, was less than the cost of fabric. And this is microfiber and it's going to wash and dry beautifully. Now, I could make a tablecloth out of regular fabric, but I found this to be cheaper. Consider making this project not just for the 4th of July, but there's all other special occasions that you can adapt the project to. So, for instance, Valentine's Day, and you could use hearts. Shamrocks for St. Patrick's Day. You could make one of these for weddings, for the head wedding table, and you could incorporate the bridal colors in there. If it's an outdoor wedding, it's going to be beautiful. So just think outside the box for what you can adapt this project for. But you want to construct the pockets first. So the purpose of the pockets is to hold weighted objects. I would recommend that you use a heavy material. So this is denim in there. You're going to create 4 of them. Once you have the pockets stitched out, trim them on the line right there. And I used my ruler and just trimmed on that stitch line that I created. And then cut a lining fabric to match. Stitch around, put the right sides together, stitch around the outside, and leave a little opening in the bottom here. Then turn them right side out, and you'll have a nice finished seam right there. And you've got an opening in the bottom. If you want to slip stitch the opening closed, feel free. But I just left the opening open, and then when I top stitch the pocket onto the tablecloth, it by default closes the bottom in there. And I'm all about, if I can streamline a project, doing it that way. Okay, as far as stabilizers for the project, I prefer Floriani Perfect Stick Tearaway. As far as hooping it, hoop the Floriani Perfect Stick paper side up, score the paper. Of course, we've got the new stiletto that you can use. Then remove the paper. And I like to score across in the middle and all around the outside. We do have a couple of other options. For instance, you could use Floriani Wet and Stick for this project. You would hoop the wet and stick. You're going to put a little water on there to activate the adhesive, and then you would put your tablecloth on top of that. Or you could use Floriani Wet and Gone Tacky. The drawback to Wet and Gone Tacky is that once you wash it, Wet and Gone Tacky, it's water soluble, and it all washes away. So there might be an instance, maybe you have an open weave tablecloth, a lacy tablecloth or something that you're working with, and that might be a perfect application for that. With stabilizers, there's never one right or wrong one. This is a new product. It's for dark fabrics, and it's called RNK Stick, Stitch, and Tear. And this is a perfect option if you were doing a tablecloth out of a dark fabric, like a navy blue or something like that. The white will show, this will not. So if you're doing a dark tablecloth, look for that. As far as when you're stitching the embroidery design, I think I went over this in pretty much a lot of detail as we were looking at the software. But as I said, this is a raw edge design, raw edge applique, and so you're going to trim that away. I love these little scissors right here. They're curved with snips in there, and they're called curved precision scissors. They are included in that new educator tool set. But there's a new tool coming out, and it's in the Quilter Select product line. And this tool is fabulous. What it is precision applique scissors. So you see this got this nice curved handle. It's got the bill on there that helps to lift the fabric away. And when you look at the tip on there, this tip on here is ultra sharp. So this tool is fabulous. So you can find it at your dealers that carry Quilter Select. As far as threads go in there, this is just walking through the steps. As I said, I think I covered this in great detail as we went through the software lesson. As far as the creative threads go, this is that red, white, and blue variegated thread. These are the mixed threads. These are called a twist. And then these are the variegated. What you'll find is these have a 1-inch color change. And so when you're using those, they don't really work well for solid fill stitches like satin stitches, because when you use them that way, you're going to get this definite striping pattern. And if that's the look you're going for, great. But I just wanted to show that. I love the variegated threads. I like to play with thread, and you can really change the look of a design by substituting a variegated thread as in lieu of a solid color. When you're sewing the pockets to the tablecloth, here's my Quilter Select 5-inch ruler. And those rulers are wonderful because, first of all, they have a coated surface on there so that they don't slip on your fabric. They also have a 45-degree marking on there. And so I laid that ruler right on the edge of the fabric. I straightened it out. And then I used, this is a friction pen, to mark where the pocket was going to go. So I put my pocket on there, and then I'm going to stitch it. And this is a tip that I learned from a different educator. This is an open-toed sewing foot. If you use the open-toed foot, what you can do is, if you notice, I line up the edge of that pocket on the one side of the open toe. And then I utilize my needle, and I move my needle over to the left. So as I stitch that pocket in place, it just came right down the edge right here. And you could not even see the top stitching, and it really secured that pocket in place nicely. And when you're doing applique, using the open toe foot really gives you a lot more visibility when you're stitching that down. Once you have the pockets on, then you have to add the stars. So this isn't a complicated project, but it actually took me all day to stitch the project out because I had to make the pockets, I had to stitch the pockets on. Once I got the pockets on, I had to re-hoop that and add the star appliques. So once the pockets were on, I folded the tablecloth over the pocket at a 45-degree angle, and I stuck it down with embroidery perfection tape. This streamlined the hooping process. Then I laid the pocket down onto that, and once again I used Floriani Perfect 6 stabilizer, and then I saved the designs, the stars, one at a time. So you can add them, and so within the hoop I just went in, I added a star, and then I used my features on my machine to move the star where I wanted it. The stars were not aligned, but I think that I didn't want them aligned. We're utilizing raw edge applique, and if I had those stars perfectly aligned, it would give it a more probably formal look. So I just placed them around the way that I wanted. And so it's up to you how many you want to put on. I thought 5 looked really good around the pocket. You might want to do more. You might want to do fewer. You might not want to add the stars at all. And then once I got done, I did go ahead and I found some really cute 4th of July buttons, and I added a button to the inside of each star. So that's the way that project went together. If you make the project, which I hope you will, think about it. Remember that we have a Floriani embroidery Facebook group, and so that's a great place to ask questions or to post your projects. If you're on Instagram, you can put in @KCFarrell, just some ideas for hashtags, or these are how you search by it: July Project, Floriani Embroidery. How about Americana Applique? There's a whole section of Americana Applique on Instagram. If you do a search on Americana Applique, it's really interesting what you get. And then the other one is Patriotic Embroidery. So just some hashtags that you can add on there. And with that being said, if you have any questions, and I encourage you to ask them, you can email me. My email is kathyf@rnkdistributing.com. And with that, DJ, are you there? I'm going to turn it back over to you.
I am here. Thank you very much, Kathy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, DJ.